Well, my name is Josh. So glad you can be in the room with us. That you've chosen to spend 70 minutes of your Sunday morning in here is just so valuable, and we appreciate that. And hopefully, you've enjoyed our time of singing, of hearing stories, and for the kids that got to go out there having great fun over there in their space. We're in part 4 of our series, The Fundamentalist, where we're looking at what is essential and what is not essential. And as we kick off this morning, I want to ask you a question. Have you ever at any point in your life thought to yourself, as you've looked around at the world and you've seen things that just don't make sense to you in terms of injustice and wrong, have you ever looked around at the world and thought to yourself, why doesn't God do something about it? Has that ever been a thought of yours? Like, why doesn't God do something about fill in the blank? You open your phone, you look at the news, you look at the media, and you sort of go, is God even paying attention? Why doesn't God step in and do something about what's happening? And I mean, if we were honest and if we were to put ourselves in God's shoes, we would have dealt with it by now, right? Surely. Absolutely. We would have stepped in and made it right. We look around at our world and we look at war and genocide and disease, and we think to ourselves, if I was in God's position, of course I would come in and clean up the mess. And in fact, for you personally, maybe a big thing that is a stumbling block for you even choosing to follow Jesus may even be this very issue of there is so much that is messy in our world. How can I follow God when our world doesn't say that he is real? So today we're going to be looking at the theme of justice as we continue our series, The Fundamentalist, recovering the essentials of our faith. So as I said, we're in week 4 of an 8-part series where we're answering one question, which is, what must one believe to be a faithful follower of Jesus? What do you have to believe? What does it mean to get the card to be able to enter into the club, so to speak? And as a church who believes that following Jesus is not only good for you personally, we believe it's good for our world collectively. We want to make sure that we stay focused on the main things, because when the church gets distracted, people can get hurt. So if you're new to faith, or perhaps you're returning to faith, this 8-week series is all about what are the building blocks, what are the fundamentals, what are the essentials, what are the non-negotiables to following Jesus. And for those of us who have been following Jesus for a while, the challenge over this 8 weeks is basically, this is an audit to say, are we still keeping the main thing the main thing? Now, I've been saying that for the last few weeks, make sure that, audit yourself if you're a follower of Jesus. But how do we do that? I'm going to tell you today how you can audit yourself. So if you've been following Jesus for a while, this is for you. And if you're new to faith or you're thinking about faith, this may not apply to you. But just for the rest of us, just for a second, here's a test to know if some non-essential beliefs have crept their way into your faith journey. If at any point in your life, when you think about, well, what must one believe to be a true follower of Jesus? If you ever think to yourself, well, it's all about Jesus and if you ever add Jesus and you put something after it, you may have let something non-essential sneak into your faith. Perhaps for you personally, it's, to be a follower of Jesus, you got to follow Jesus, but also you got to agree with my economic philosophy. If everyone could see economics the way that I do, then that's right. In fact, if you follow Jesus, you have to believe this about the economy. Maybe for some of us, it's, yes, to be a Jesus follower, you have to follow Jesus and also the political party that I support. Because of course, that's who Jesus would support. The other guys, Jesus would never support them. Or perhaps when it comes to parenting, of course you follow Jesus and you've also got to parent the way that I parent. Or perhaps it's about education, you've got to have the education that I do. Or perhaps it's Jesus and seeing the world through your lens when it comes to the idea of gender roles or view on a variety of issues. Or perhaps it's as simple as you've got to follow Jesus and also only watch the shows that I approve, because what shows I watch is what everyone should watch. So if you've ever found yourself following Jesus is Jesus and you've added something in, you've added a qualifier in, the chances are you've let something non-essential, creep in to your faith. And the church has played the game of Jesus and for a while, and the result is always the same. The result is that people who Jesus loves and is trying to actively reach get excluded by the people who are meant to be representing him to them. The result of Jesus and always is that we end up excluding people who don't think, don't act, or do not look like us. And when the church gets distracted and we add things into the faith journey, the result is that people get hurt. And the grace-filled, love-driven, for the world, for all of time movement of Jesus ends up becoming divided and fractured. And so to make sure that we don't end up in that place, so that we don't have a divided and fractured faith, we need to make sure we remind ourselves, well, what are the essentials? So here's what we've covered so far. To be a faithful follower of Jesus, the fundamentalist. Number one we looked at is that Jesus is God's Son and our King. Jesus is God's Son and our King. Number two, we looked at Jesus came to illustrate and to demonstrate what God is like. If you want to know what God is like, then you go to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and you look at Jesus, how he lived and what he did, and you have what God is like. Then last week we looked at this idea of sin and the fact that Jesus defined sin as anything that hurts you or other people. And if you haven't heard any of those messages, you can go online and have a listen, but that's where we've tread so far. And to help understand our fourth fundamental for this week, we're going to go back to the first recorded family fight in the Bible. We're going back to Genesis, to a story which many people know, but maybe we don't all know well enough to apply something that's actually quite crucial for following Jesus. So, to help us understand a little bit of the context of what's happening in this story, all you need to know is this. In the Christian story so far, when we get to Genesis chapter 4, what's happened is God formed the world and it was perfectly working as it should be. People were put onto the world and invited, hey, you can work with God to make this world a great place. Pretty good deal so far. Unfortunately, Adam and Eve got tempted into wanting to become like God. The serpent, the snake, you may have heard the story, says, oh, you can eat from that tree. You'll see as God does. He's just trying to keep a secret from you. But if you want to see like him, eat the tree, eat the fruit. They eat the fruit, and suddenly this perfect working world, which is as it should have been, became broken and fractured, and it started to break apart. And it's in that context that Adam and Eve go and have two boys, Cain and Abel. And if you've never read the story before, it can be a little bit of a ride. So it's up there on the screen. Otherwise, you can follow along in Genesis chapter 4. So we're introduced to the sons. It says this. It says, now Abel kept flocks and Cain worked the soil. And in the course of time, Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord. So we're introduced to Adam and Eve's first two sons. One farms the crops, and the other one makes sure I have a steak in my steak sandwich. So Cain, the older brother, the crop guy, comes up and he offers up an offering to God and says, here is a part of what I have done, and I'm going to offer it to God to say thank you, and so that you can keep good things coming my way. And before you judge Cain too harshly for offering up a sacrifice, we all offer up sacrifices of our own, whether it's time or money or attention or skills in the hope of garnering some growth. So it's pretty natural. So Cain offers up his, and then Abel comes along and he also offers up an offering to God. And he takes the fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flocks. The Lord looked on favor with Abel, so he agreed and said, this is great. And he said, this offering is a good offering. So Abel, the younger brother, he sacrifices to God, but he does it from the first part. The best. And God likes the fact that Abel did that. The fact that Abel showed that, God, you are a priority in my life. But on Cain, he had a different opinion. The story says, on Cain and his offering, he did not look at with favor. So Cain was very angry and his face became downcast. And you can imagine the dynamic at play here. Cain is hurt. His younger brother, Abel, is looked at in a better light. And his response to that, instead of going, maybe I could change what I'm doing, his response to that is to turn to anger and frustration. Cain felt judged, and when we feel judged about something, like we're not enough, it can manifest itself in anger towards other people. So the Lord goes up to Cain and says, Cain, why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? And it's a little bit like God's response here is sort of saying, well, what did you think was going to happen? Like, how can you get angry when my response is sort of matching the issue? You did not give a good offering, or sacrifice. There's no favor. He goes on and says, if you just do what is right, will you not be accepted? I mean, if you do not do what is right, then sin is crouching at your door, and it desires to have you, but you must rule over it. So Cain is talking to God, and God is saying to him, if you do what is right, then it will be accepted to me. But if you go along and you shortchange and you don't engage with the process, then you're going to invite some wrong and some evil and some bad into your life. So to contextualize a little bit of what's happening here for Cain. He's angry and he's feeling judged, and his younger brother is getting all of the praise. So for those of you with siblings, it's like mum and dad are going up to the other sibling and going, well done, well done, well done. And then they go to you and go, not good enough. And it's even worse for this dynamic because he's the older son. He's the example setter. He's the one who's meant to be doing the right thing. And he's looking at his younger golden prince of his brother, and he's just feeling angry. He sees what God's expecting, the ideal and what should be, and he feels angry and frustrated at what is happening. And sort of like when we get compared to others, maybe in other contexts. Perhaps maybe you're married and someone goes to you and say, isn't that spouse amazing? And you feel a little bit judged because you feel like, am I not measuring up to that? Or perhaps as a parent, someone goes along and says, oh, those people, they parent so well. And you think to yourself, do I parent well enough? Or maybe there's a friend in your friendship circle and everyone's always going, they're so generous, they're so amazing. And you start to think to yourself, am I generous? Am I amazing? Or perhaps in the workplace, there's that coworker who just follows through on every commitment in a timely and amazing fashion, and they get all the praise from the boss and the co-workers, and you start to think to yourself, am I good enough for this job? And we feel like that when they get painted as the ideal, and we look at our lives and we see that there's a disconnect between what is expected and ideal over there, we begin to feel judged. And when we feel judged, we have a choice. We can either rise up and grow through the process, or we can actually turn around and tear down that ideal and think to ourselves, if we can take that ideal down a notch, then we're going to feel better about who we are. So this is what Cain chose to do when he got confronted about this ideal of Abel and when he was confronted with his own shortcomings. It says, now Cain said to his brother Abel, let's go out to the field. And they went together, which means it wasn't an abnormal request. Hey, brother, let's go and hang out together. But while they were in the field, Cain attacked Abel and killed him. So Cain chose to take his feelings of inadequacy, and his response was, I'm just going to remove the ideal from the earth. I'm going to wipe him out. If I'm getting compared to him and I'm not good enough, I'm just going to remove him from the picture. It's sort of like when we get confronted with that ideal, and instead of thinking to ourselves, maybe I could be a better spouse or parent or co-worker or friend, instead we choose to sometimes inside our heads take them down a notch, or sometimes we even say it out loud to other people. So here's a couple of things that, could happen. Rather than adjust our own behavior, sometimes we go to dirty tactics. So we end up saying things like, yeah, Tina's husband is very thoughtful and nice. It's a shame that he's had the same job and no house, and he's ugly. Oh, great guy, but, like we backhand comment sometimes. Or maybe it's like, I love how Jeremy never raises his voice with the kids. Isn't that amazing? Great guy. He's on his phone at the park, right? You saw him at the park the other day? Yeah, he's on his phone. And we start to tear down the ideal. Or perhaps in friendship circles, we go, oh, Samantha, great friend, really good. A little bit needy, right? Needy? Yeah, she's needy. Or maybe in the workplace, it comes down to, Jason over there, really great worker, but he's always chatting to Graham in HR. And let's be honest, his food takes up all the fridge space. And like Cain, rather than growing and becoming better people, our choice of seeing something which we're not, we go and we tear down, and we try to remove, and we let our anger respond. So the Lord notices that Abel's missing and knows what's happened. He goes, look, Cain, where's your brother Abel? And I think this is a little bit of a throwback to earlier on in the story when Adam and Eve did the wrong thing. God came and said, where are you guys? And it's almost like God's giving them a chance to respond well before giving out judgment. So he says, where's your brother Abel? To which Cain should have said, I'm so sorry. My anger got the best of me. How can we make this right? But he just goes, I don't know. And he says a phrase which for some of you may not even realize it's from the Bible, but this is where we get this saying. He goes to them, am I my brother's keeper? How am I meant to know where he is? Am I meant to be in charge of his diary? If he isn't where you think he should be, then that's on him. That's not on me. But what we have here is Cain, a man who's feeling judged because his high-performing brother did the right thing, and he chose to kill him rather than respond well. And let's go through this next section as a block here. The Lord said, what have you done? What have you done? your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. And that is amazing imagery, isn't it? Like the blood cries out from the ground. Now you are under a curse, and you're going to get driven from the ground. Remember, he's the crop guy. The ground is where he gets his food. You're going to get driven from the ground, which opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it will not yield its crops for you. You will be a restless wanderer on this earth. And Cain said to the Lord, my punishment is too much. That's more than I can bear. Cain goes on, he says, today you are driving me from the land, and I'm going to be hidden from your presence. And I'm going to be a restless wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me is going to kill me. And what God says in response is sometimes often overlooked. Now, you can track with the logic of what Cain is saying. So God has said, your brother's blood cries out to me. You killed him. The consequence of that is that you can't yield crop. You're going to be away from me, and you're going to have to wander the earth. And Cain's response is natural. Well, if I have to wander the earth and they know what I did, there's not many of us around, they're going to kill me. What else would they do? They're going to want to seek vengeance. And we get that. We get the logic of that. He is saying, I'm vulnerable now, and my punishment is not death, but basically it is a punishment of death. And that question that we had before of why doesn't God do something about whatever it is? Our response when we hear this story is he deserves to be punished. There's an opportunity for God to do something, and he does. He curses the land. He removes him from his presence. He forces him to wander the earth. But we go, sometimes is that enough? Cain is a murderer who deserves punishment because when he saw the ideal and his inadequacy, he chose to wipe it out rather than deal with his feelings. So there is an injustice. But look at what God does, and it's very interesting. Verse 15 says, but the Lord said to him, not so. So Cain said, when I'm wandering around, people are just going to kill me. And God says, no, they're not going to kill you. Anyone who kills you is going to suffer vengeance 7 times over. Then the Lord put a mark on Cain so that anyone who found him could not kill him. To which we go, what? But how is it that Cain can kill his brother? And God's response is, don't worry, no one's going to kill you. And in fact, not only that, if someone does kill you, then the vengeance upon that is going to be 7 times over. To which we go to ourselves, does that mean Cain is worth 7 times as much as his brother? Right? That doesn't seem fair. That doesn't seem logical. That doesn't seem like that is a fair swap. But the theory on this, and I think this checks out really well. And if you've got a better one, come tell me afterwards. I'll preach it next time I'm doing the series. But this is what I think is happening. God is a grace-filled God. And he is extending grace in this situation. And to many of us, we look at that and say, yeah, he extended grace to Cain. Because Cain, who did the wrong thing, who needs to pay for what he did, he gets protected. He cannot die. Yeah, his life's not as amazing as it could be, but at least he's not going to get killed for it. But I don't think God's grace is actually primarily targeted towards Cain. The main recipient of God's grace is actually Abel's family. They're the ones that receive God's grace. This is an act of grace for the family of Abel. God's decision to stop anybody seeking revenge on Cain is an act of grace towards Abel and his descendants, because Abel's descendants would have wanted to kill Cain. Blood for blood, like for like. And God says, that's not your story. That's not who you are, and that is not who you are going to become. Because in taking revenge on Cain by killing him, it would have just forced Abel's descendants to become just like Cain. And God said, I've got a bigger plan for your life. Your life is not going to be defined by that. So he protected them by letting Cain live. So before the family could step in and do something horrendous, God stepped in and put an end to that being a possibility. And despite Cain's appalling decision to kill his brother, God did not allow Abel and his family to follow suit. He did not allow that to become part of their story. God did not allow Abel and his descendants to become just like Cain. So in week 1, we looked at the first fundamental. Jesus is God's son and our king. Meaning that whatever Jesus references is basically the reference point for anything to do with Christianity. I was having a conversation at the on Friday at our school carnival, sports day thing for the primary school down at Hillside. And I was having a chat to a couple of the parents there. And one of the ladies comes up and goes, Josh, so Christian, Catholic, Baptist, like, are you all the same or what? And I went, it's a good question. We're going to have to redefine some terms here because you're sort of, it's not, yes, we're all Christian, but then we're all different, right? And we talked about it back and forth a little bit. And she said, well, what's the main connector point? I said, look, any Christian church is basically going to have as its fundamental thing that Jesus is who he said he is, that he died for us, and that he is the center of our church, of our movement. So when we said in week 1 that Jesus is God's Son and our King, that is just something that is just central to the church. So when Jesus speaks or says anything in the Bible, that is the spokesperson for the Christian movement. I don't care if you find it in another part of the Bible, in ancient history documents, whatever. If Jesus said it, that is our reference point for how we operate as a church. And this is what he actually said to us in John 5:22. He reminds us that when it comes to judging and there being judgment, it's going to happen. Don't worry, it will happen. But he's the one that determines that. This is what it said in John 5:22. He says, the Father judges no one, but has given all judgment, all authority to judge, all authority to the Son. So we look at the story of Cain and Abel and we think Cain got off easy. Where's the judgment? Where's the end result? And in our own lives, when we see suffering and we see brokenness, we think, when is the time coming when there is going to be the comeuppance? When is the time when the right will be wronged? When is the time when what was and is broken is going to be fixed and made whole again? And from Jesus' perspective, he says, it is coming, but it's my call. It's going to happen, but on my timeline. So while we are unsure about the details and in terms of how it's going to look, both for now and in the perspective of eternity, we know this, our fourth fundamental. Jesus promised justice in the end. Jesus has promised justice in the end, all right? He is the judge. He will judge. So there is justice coming one day. But there's an invitation in the meantime. Jesus says, I will deal with it when I deal with it. But in the meantime, and probably in our lifetime, I want you to trust me. And there's an invitation from Jesus to trust him while we wait for that to happen. There will be a time when justice is served and everything's made right. But until then, all we are asked to do is to trust Jesus and follow him. Jesus invites us not to become like Cain, to sit as judge, jury, and executioner. Instead, he says, to avoid becoming like Cain, let me show you what this looks like in real life. And we talk about this a lot, and it's not what we want to hear when we're in a place of anger or wanting vengeance or judgment. But it's the reality of what Jesus did for us. How do we avoid becoming like Cain? Jesus said these things. Jesus said, no matter what's happening, it's never evil for evil. It's love your enemies. No matter what's happening, it's turn the other cheek. And in fact, go further. You got to pray for those who hit you. He says, be generous. Put other people first. And he encourages us to go the extra mile and to live for later. When we feel judged, when we feel inadequate, when we feel like something has been done to us, or when we feel like something has been done to someone we love, it is never okay. It is not okay. And in my mind, and in your mind probably, when people do things to us that hurt us or hurt people we love, they deserve judgment. They deserve punishment. They deserve the full force of the law. They deserve to suffer like we have suffered. And I'm with you on that. From my human side, absolutely. But luckily, none of us are in charge of everything. Luckily, none of us are the one that makes everyone suffer just because we suffer. And I hear you, it's not fair. But Jesus is the one who is in charge of it all. And Jesus lived to this. He never repaid evil for evil. He loved his enemies. He always turned the other cheek and went and ate with those who even persecuted him. He was generous and put other people first. He went the extra mile and lived for later. And what was his reward on earth? Died on a cross. Which sounds like a loss. But it was actually the stage of the greatest victory, because from his death he came back to life and showed us that this way works. It may not bring everything right now, but it brings us peace and it brings us closer to our Heavenly Father when we trust him with the pain and the things in this world that are not as they should be. When God's final king showed up, when Jesus showed up the first time 2,000 years ago, he came and he delayed his final judgment and he brought grace and mercy. He provided an opportunity for everyone who did not live properly to trust in him, and has given us since then 2,000 years to go and live like he lived and accept that he accepted God's punishment on our behalf. And as a result of following Jesus, as a result of living that stuff out, we get to live in the reality that he came back to life. He's with us no matter what. And we get access to peace in a chaotic world. We get access to joy in unjoyful times. And we get access to the hope of heaven, both now and for eternity, when we put our trust in him and follow the way of Jesus. So here's the fundamentalist. Number 1, Jesus is God's Son and our King. 2, Jesus came to illustrate and to demonstrate exactly what God is like. 3, Jesus defines sin as anything that harms you or harms another person. And today we looked at the fact that Jesus promises justice. It's coming. But he promised justice in the end. And he invites us to trust him in the meantime. When we follow how he lived, he will deliver justice in the end. And it will not be probably what you want or what you expected. But I can guarantee you it will be exactly what you need. Let me pray. Father God, thank you that you see the brokenness in our world and that you do not just sit back and let it happen. You've sent us, those of us that follow you. You've sent us into situations that are hard, that are broken, that are messy, that are just gross, and you send us in there to bring light and bring the presence of Jesus. For those of us that follow you, thank you that we get to join you in that journey. And God, for those here who are still thinking about following you or wondering whether following you is worth it, I pray that they will meet people who live this out. They don't meet the judgmental, want everything to happen now Christians, but they meet the people of peace who trust you for judgment in the end and follow your way while living it out on earth. So be with us, Lord, in your name and for your glory. Amen.